So how does dealing with a customer overseas differ from dealing with a customer in New Jersey? Well, for one thing, there are obvious things. There are potential language issues. Somebody said that the British and the Americans are two people separated by a common language. Even the British speak differently than we do and have different language issues. But outside of Britain, of course, there are lots of places where we have language issues. How many speak French besides Tanya? Okay. How many speak Spanish? How many speak Italian? How many speak German? Give me a language in Africa.
Arabic.
How many speak Arabic? Point is that language issues are part of the problem and part of what we have to be aware of when we're going overseas. How many speak New Jersey? Okay. There are currency issues. Selling to New Jersey, everybody uses the dollar. But what happens when we want to sell to France? France is on the euro. Are we going to sell our product in euros, or are we going to sell our product in dollars and have the risk of a exchange rate issue? Because we don't know what the end cost is going to be because they fluctuate. It's a concern we have to be aware of. There are transit times. Arnold, how long does it take to get a shipment from here to London on the boat?
If you use me, I'll get it here in 2 days.
There you go. Okay.
A week and a half.
But there are transit times, and going to New Jersey on a truck could take 3 weeks, but especially if there are lanes closed on the Brooklyn Bridge. But essentially, when you're talking about going overseas, going to other markets, you have to keep in mind the transit issues that exist. And the transit time will be longer. There are time zone considerations. Anybody deal with somebody in California? When you deal with somebody in California, they're only 3 hours behind us, right? So you're up at 8 o'clock at your desk, and you have an issue, you have to wait until 11 before they're at 8 o'clock at their desk. It's not so bad. What if you're dealing with somebody in China? Taiwan is 12 hours behind us. So when you're sitting at your desk at 8 in the morning, it's 8 o'clock at night in China. And it creates a lot of difficulty in communicating because you have to recognize that that's an issue. Then there's some less obvious issues that have been touched on here to some extent. There are regulatory requirements, both on the export side from here and on the import side on the other countries, right? Because we have export issues. For example, there are products that our government doesn't want us to send overseas. You have to have a license for many of those products. Go to export.gov and you can start to understand some of those issues. But there are products that you can't, under any circumstances, export. Cocaine is one of those. In terms of the import side, countries have restrictions on what you come in. They apply tariffs to things that you might be bringing into their country. There are issues with regard to certain consumer requirements that you have to meet that might be different than are here in the United States. Those regulatory requirements have to be paid attention to, otherwise you may be prevented from doing the export at all, or your export may end up in some warehouse locked away that you'll never get to. There are labeling issues. When you send something to New Jersey, that you've been manufacturing here in New York, the label is the same. The requirements, if it's a food product, the requirements on the label are the requirements that the FDA requires you put on a food product. You're exporting to a European country, the Eurozone has separate labeling requirements and different labeling requirements than is found in the United States. And so you have to make sure that those labeling requirements have been met. What's more is, there are language issues, of course. So the language on your label, if you're going to sell it in France, has to be in French. If you're going to sell it in Canada, it has to be in French and English. So you have to be aware of those things because they're going to be part of the problem of doing business outside of here. Cultural differences are a big issue. People are different. We know how different New Jersey people are. She's never, Tony's gonna shoot me. You know how different New Jersey people are. People in other countries, Canadians, Tony says, are nice.
So is New Jersey.
So in New Jersey. And so there are people that there are cultural differences in how people behave and what they buy and how they use products, which can be different from how they're used here in the United States. So you have to look carefully at what the cultural differences are, and you have to be sensitive to those cultural differences, whatever they might be. Tanya touched on intellectual property, which is a big issue when you're trying to export outside the United States. You want to make sure that what's yours is yours, and that nobody takes your product and walks away with it and slaps their name on it and starts selling it. Start selling a copy at a third of the price that you're selling it for. So protecting your intellectual property rights is a critical activity that you have to be aware of and you have to be clear on.